Welcome to Come to Think of It, a program where we talk about things that matter. Today, our program is the third in a series that we're doing on the nature of addictions, and that's a title which I stole directly from the website of my guest today, Roget Lockard. Roget is a very highly regarded addiction therapist, and very happy to have you with us today again, Roget. Welcome back.
Great to be back, Casey.
This is, we're at a point now, we have talked in previous episodes about where addiction comes from, the origin of the addiction, and you said, or have said, that addiction enters our lives as an honest mistake. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if you can just give us a very brief encapsulation of what that means.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I'm alluding to there, and the language that I think I used in our earlier conversations, is that addiction enters our lives when we discover what could be called an existential shortcut. Mm-hmm. A shortcut to, in particular, fulfillment of the longings that in the unique way for each individual person make up the tapestry of our lives. And we are all, there's a wonderful quote by Rainer Marie Rilke, which I should have with me, but
I think I have it.
Well, good. If you can find it, it will be much more adequate than my paraphrasing.
Sure.
But it
says,
yeah.
My blood is alive with many voices telling me that I am made of longing.
Precisely. And one of the points that I emphasize again and again in sharing my way of understanding addiction is that those many voices are an absolutely unique chorus, if you will, for every single individual on the face of the earth, which of last count was quite a few million individuals. So on the one hand, what we have in common is that notion that we're made of longings, that's kind of the vital juice, if you will, of our existential experience, the longings themselves, and then our striving for their fulfillment. And at the same time, that very fact that we're made of longings brings us together, and that we are all somehow striving to achieve fulfillment. The things that get in the way of that fulfillment range from simple, well, I feel pretty good. I'm living a good life, but it would be all right if I felt better. Mm-hmm. More of whatever my longings are. We have those moments, most of us have those moments of feeling just right with the world, and those are precious moments. Mm-hmm. But most of us could stand it if we had a lot more of those. And many of us tend to feel that we could stand it if those moments of whatever fulfillments they are were more sumptuous.
More intense, expansive.
More intense, more complete, whatever it may be. And so when something happens, we're moving along the path of our life and we suddenly encounter something that provides us with experiences of fulfillment that are head and shoulders above what we've experienced up to that point. We go in that direction. That's just what sentient creatures do. I think we've talked about that. Mm-hmm. And so I call that an honest mistake, but frankly, I think it's even a little misleading to call it a mistake, in the sense that why would you do anything else?
Right, yes.
You know, well, because your mommy warned you that it might be bad for you? Okay, possibly. But the bottom line is we go out there and we pursue those things that present themselves to us and demonstrate to us by our personal subjective experience that this is taking us into the juicy stuff of life. Again, whatever that is for each person. Before the show, I mentioned to you that two-line couplet that we're both familiar with, and you may know the author, I don't, that happens to be about alcoholism, but could be about any addiction, that says, alcohol gave me wings to fly, then it took away the sky.
Yes.
So what I'd like to say is that alcohol can be, as we've said before, any of numberless technologies, what I call technologies. It could
Which
be
is basically a system of control.
a system exactly of managing our existential state, our affective feelings and identity states. And it can be a substance, it can be a behavior, it can be a relationship, it can be gestures. We'll get into that as our series unfolds more in more detail. But the germane point is that it becomes richly available to us. And of course we welcome that.
Yep. I'll interject a personal anecdote here. I was having a conversation once with two friends who were both talking about how they used and abused drugs for many, many years and then stopped. And that was not my experience. And the person, they were saying that all along they were trying to chase that first experience and they could never get it back. And I thought that was very interesting because I'm very familiar with that. And then one of these women said, I wonder if it was really real in the first place. And I went, okay, there's the difference. That's the difference between this person who is able to stop and this person who isn't. Because I knew that it was real. And what I said to her was, if you grow up feeling completely insecure, if you're uncomfortable in every social situation, you live your every day in fear of you don't know what, and you have all this anxiety about everything in your life, and then you discover this magic thing you can do. All you have to do is take a drink of this stuff, and all that goes away. And before I could say it, she said, who wouldn't want that?
Exactly.
And that's it.
Yeah, yeah. It begs the question in a formal sense as to whether it is in fact real or not, but who cares? When one is in the middle of it, the experience is that it's real.
Yes.
So we can sit back and sort of clinically and philosophically analyze it and say, well, it wasn't really authentic fulfillment because, unbeknownst to us, it was taking us into a place of fragmentation of self rather than integration of self. For example, that's the kind of thing that we can say in retrospect.
We had no way to know
But
that.
in the moment, it is, as you were suggesting, perhaps the most authentic experience we've ever had. Pseudo-authenticity, which is, of course, a wonderful notion. Who was the Hollywood figure who said, you know, the secret to being a real success in the world of theater is authenticity? Learn to fake that, you've really got it made.
I don't know, but that's brilliant.
So, what addiction does is it comes from the outside, and it in effect presents us with an experience of pseudo-authenticity that totally wins us over, totally persuades us.
Yeah. If you feel fulfilled, that is.
Yeah.
Why is it not fulfillment
Right.
in that instant?
And you know, there is this that I have observed in a lot of clients, a lot of other addicts that I've known, and my own experience. And I think it's important and really counts for something. Addiction can give you a glimpse of what's possible. The addictive payoff. I often think of Being There.
Yes.
The movie?
Yes, wonderful film, yes.
Chance the Gardner?
Yes.
Exactly, who spent his first years through adolescence into adulthood in one house. He had no idea what was in the world out there. And then he went out in the world and had his adventures. And
yeah, he was ejected, essentially.
Exactly, by the death of his host, as it were. But I think of a kid, say, who's brought up inside a house, and suddenly, and there are windows, but the blinds are always closed. And so that's all he knows. And so he makes the best that he can. It might be a nice house with a lot of entertainments. It might be a shabby house. But that's what he knows.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he comes along one day and he discovers a way, or someone presents him with a way to open the curtains. Oh my God. There's this world out there.
Yeah.
Or in today's technological possibilities, he discovers the television set. And of course, in the movie, Chance the Gardner was riveted to his television set.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
But the lesson that we discover, if we're fortunate enough to move from the addictive preoccupation with the window or with the television set, is how to tear ourselves away from that. And that's what we call abstinence.
Yes.
To tear ourselves away from the enticement, which by now has come to, in the classical course of addiction, has come to own us and command us very imperiously. And steel ourselves and find allies to help us move out into the actual world.
I have a few questions before we get to that. One of the things is that having walked this path myself, I feel like I should have a lot better answers to some of these questions than I do. And in a sense, that's part of the bafflement of this, is that we don't really know how we got from there to here. From that original experience that was so fulfilling,
the wonderful experience,
to being owned by this power that we have come to rely on. I think at one point in your writing you talked about it becomes a matter of, or perceived to be a matter of survival, and then there's a long distance there, and
for most of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, even if it's a short time, it's a long distance.
That's well put. Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I'm interested in what do we know about the mechanism of that?
Well, depending on how we're using the word mechanism, if we're talking about the physiology of it and so forth, on the one hand, we know a lot, in the sense it's a lot of research been done. On the other hand, I don't find that to be illuminating about the fundamental predicament. The fundamental predicament, the way I try to sum it up, is that addiction teaches us two lies. The first is the one that we've been talking about, and that is that X technology will allow us to manage our feelings and our identity state much more successfully. And of course, in the beginning, it's a very plausible proposition because that's what we were saying. It's our compelling experience. As time passes, that is revealed to be a lie. But by then, it's got us by the throat, and we are in its service. But in the meantime, we have become unconscious subscribers to a second lie, which is so compelling that we don't even know that we believe it. And that is that feelings and identity states ought to be managed. And the idea of management has kind of a controlling mastery element to it, and that is so much a part, I think we might have touched on this in an earlier conversation, that is so much a part of our culture.
Oh, absolutely.
That
I was just thinking about the people that we idealize in popular culture, and they're the epitome of management.
Well, as it happens, of course, we are having this conversation right on the heels of the first of the two interviews with Lance Armstrong and Oprah Winfrey. And I don't know if you happen to pay attention to that.
I have not seen them yet, no.
But I would be very hard-pressed to find someone who is more emblematic of that belief system than Lance Armstrong. and he says so in so many words, that the critical thing is to be on top of everything. That said, that's suggestive of a personality type. It suggests that there's only one personality type that can emerge out of this belief system, and that's not true. A lot of people manage things by being victims. A lot of people manage things by isolation. So it's not, you know, the robust, heroic managerial figure. It's a more subtle notion of management, but it's that inner conviction. I like that word better than belief, because belief sounds like something you sort of change your mind about. Conviction is just like knowing. Right. Do I know that there's a table here? Yes. Do I believe that? No, I know it. It's that kind of knowing that comes to characterize the addictive predicament. To jump ahead a little bit, that's why the very, 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 very first thing that the 12-step programs, which are kind of the renowned path to resolution of the addictive predicament, the very first step is accepting that I can't. That managerial solution is bankrupt for me.
Yes, the step even uses the word manageable, right, in the form of unmanageable.
Exactly, right. Powerlessness, unmanageability, these are the core propositions to start with. In the very simplest way of stating the essence of step one for me is I can't, which is the last thing we want to hear.
Yeah, yeah. I want to take just a step backwards from that. I had a friend who told me at a much earlier point in his life that he had become very concerned about his drinking. And so he went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and he attended quite a few meetings over the course of a month or so, and came to the conclusion that he was not an alcoholic, but just a guy who drank too much. And so he stopped drinking. And so I want to ask you about the problem drinker, because there's a distinct difference between that problem drinker and the alcoholic.
Absolutely. I often break down the possible relationships that one can have if indeed one has a relationship with alcohol. A lot of people don't have a relationship, but if one has a relationship, could say...
It's difficult not to have a relationship with alcohol in our culture, by the way.
Well, you'd be surprised at the numbers of people who don't. They're sort of invisible because the drinkers tend to be more conspicuous. But there's vast numbers of people who either don't drink at all or for whom drinking is negligible.
I want to interrupt you just a moment because I grew up in a home where there was no alcohol. My father was a Baptist minister in the rural Midwest, and Baptist ministers in the rural Midwest do not drink. But there was a very clear relationship to alcohol in that home because both of my parents were children of severe alcoholics. And so I just want to make the point that you, of course, are very well aware of, that the absence of alcohol does not mean the absence of a relationship to alcohol.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the absence of alcohol is so often suggestive that when I hear that someone doesn't, someone's parents don't drink at all or something like that, I will tend, if it doesn't seem disrespectful, to pose the question, which of their parents were alcoholic? And a preponderant percentage of the time, indeed, that's the story.
Yeah.
So, of people who do have a relationship with drinking, there are, first of all, there are very, very, very few people who just drink alcohol, that is to say, who simply swallow it and are indifferent to the fact that it brings about some kind of transformative experience. The rest of the people including perfectly healthy people who have a perfectly healthy relationship with alcohol, use it in a way that I don't use Pepsi.
Right.
But I certainly did.
There is an effect, and
There's an
the effect is a part of the experience.
Exactly. So they use it, and the four categories are use, abuse, problem use, and addiction. And in very simple sort of, what do you call it, PowerPoint, if we had that here. Use is when we are employing something to solve problems. Problem use is when the use of that thing also generates problems. Abuse. Abuse is when it generates problems. But an instance of abuse does not prove that there's problem use. It just indicates that on this one occasion, problems were generated. I might drink non-problematically for 13 years and then go out and drink a little too much and have an accident or whatever. And that's an instance of abuse, but it doesn't make me a problem drinker.
Right. Necessarily.
But if I have been doing this as a pattern, then it's realistic and I think appropriate to call me a problem drinker. The addict is someone who has a problematic, obsessive, compulsive relationship with alcohol. Although, as you were saying earlier, at any given interval of time, they may not actually be drinking it. It's still problematic. It's still compulsive. What do I mean by compulsive? I mean that on some level, the relationship that they're having with alcohol is the relationship of keeping it at arm's length, at bay.
Yes.
And that is a very preoccupying relationship to have with anything. So that even though they're not drinking, alcohol may be experienced by them as the most prominent feature of their life.
The notion of powerlessness includes a power, that there is a power over which we are powerless. And so it's kind of, I guess the mystery is, what is the difference between, and I guess it's what I identified earlier, but I just would like some elucidation on what is the difference between that problem drinker and the addict.
Well, to put it in sort of formal language, for the problem drinker, drinking was an affective solution. It allowed them to manage their feeling states. That can be very, very compelling. For the addict, it probably provided an affective solution as well, but much more importantly, it provided an existential solution. It made a major contribution to solving what I call the problem of self. I want to tell you an anecdote that was, I realize now, one of the very earliest little glimpses that I got into the way I make sense out of addiction. And that was early in my career working as a detox counselor. And there was a gentleman there who had been a client in the detox for some 600 admissions. Now, the detox opened in 1973. I started working there in 1979.
Wow.
So that's 100 admissions a year, and that's only that detox.
Wow.
Okay. He obviously used
whether
it.
he was alive.
There's a little punchline to this story, but the thing that was the initial notion that was so startling to me, it was just dumbfounding, was that one of my colleagues who had been there working at the detox from the day they opened, he was himself sober. He got sober the hard way. He got sober on a park bench. He didn't have a linen bed and so forth and so on. And one time, he and I were signing out this gentleman who was unabashedly going out to drink, and Whitey was the counselor's name. As the patient was sauntering off to get his clothes and go back out on the streets, Whitey said to me, we'll call him Edward, "Edward is not an alcoholic, you know." And I made that face. You know,
Yeah.
I think more emphatically, excuse me?
Yeah,
I mean,
how's
like,
that possible?
Poster child,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And from a medical point of view, of course, he was an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I mean, he was gravely compromised by his relationship with alcohol. So I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Edward is not powerless over alcohol." I said, "He's had 600 admissions here. What do you mean he's not powerless?" He said, "Edward comes here when he wants to come here. He leaves when he wants to leave. He drinks when he wants to drink. He stops when he wants to stop." For him, it's entirely discretionary. And so, I mean, the whole notion was so awkward and implausible. But I started watching, and I observed that Whitey was exactly right, not only about Edward, but a few other folks of his sort of population, that is to say the people who had abandoned their lives to drinking. But not because they required it for an existential, a sense of existential adequacy.
It's just a choice.
Well, and one of the real keys that I observed was that for that population, when they stopped drinking, they didn't stop being themselves. Because that's what happened to me when I stopped drinking.
Absolutely.
All the juice of Roget went away, and I was busy being a good boy.
Yeah.
Whereas,
We are completely lost in early sobriety.
oh, yeah, existentially bereft.
Yes. Yeah.
And I want to emphasize that that was not merely the down and outers. There, as I started watching for this phenomena, once Whitey brought it to my attention, I saw that there were any number of people, ranging from corporate executives to housewives to whatever, and they were kind of like your friend. They reached a point where it felt like the cost of drinking outweighed the advantages, so they stopped. But they stopped in, you know, they weren't experts. They said, "Okay, I want to stop drinking. Should I get treatment?" And the standard answer is yes, you should go get a detox. And very often that's true, because there may be a toxic level of alcohol, and the alcohol withdrawal is more dangerous than almost any other chemical withdrawal.
Which I did not know
Yeah.
when I got sober by myself at home.
Yeah, yeah. The detox system, it's worth knowing, the detox system was not established to get people sober. It was established to save lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. And any sobriety that might emerge out of that was considered gravy, but unfortunately these days it's looked at as a system failure if people go to detox and then come out and get drunk again. It's like, wow. But
Well, that brings us to a rather convenient stopping point, and we are out of time.
Okay.
So, Roget, once again, thank you very much for being
It's an
here.
absolute
and I look
delight.
forward to continuing this conversation.
Same here,
It's
Casey.
most enlightening. And thank you for joining us on Come to Think of It. I hope you'll join us next time. And until then, drive cheerfully. I'm Casey Scott.